Okay, so whenever it says find the discriminant, remember the discriminant is just the part underneath the radical. There is no radical. Okay, so we have to know if it's a discriminant. That means you're finding b squared minus 4ac. Okay, I would have that written on your paper somewhere if it's not already. So here you get negative 28 squared minus 4ac. Okay, and this was one you could use your calculator for. So you would have got 784 minus 784, which is 0. That's what you're going to put on this line. Okay, and then the number and type of zeros. So the number that they're going to have is either going to be 1 or 2. 0 is the only one where you have 1, 0. Okay, so this is 1 real, and you can put the real symbol, or you can write out real. Okay, so it's 1 real rational 0 that you have. So I want you to take a moment and double check. So what I'm going to look for on the quiz is the number 1, real, and rational. If you just put 1 rational, then you'll miss partial credit, okay, for the real. Okay, so 1 real rational. Yeah, root is fine. Yeah, you can write 0 or you can write root. I say both, I write both. Yep. Okay, and then for this one, it's b squared, so 4 squared minus 4ac. Make sure you take the negative with that. Okay, 4 squared is 16. A negative times a negative turns into a positive. This is 100, so that is your discriminant. Okay, is 100 a perfect square? Yes. So if it's a perfect square and it's positive, then you are going to have 2 real rational zeros. If it was not a perfect square, they would be irrational. Okay, so I didn't give you one of each type. That's why I had you do all of the situations at the bottom of the previous page. You have to know all the situations there. Okay, so you do have that in question 3. That's also outlined for you in your notes. All right, then we are going to be graphing inequalities. So it says make sure you fill out all your steps below and then state true or false for your test point. So when you're starting your table, you start with the opposite of b over 2a. That's how you're going to make your table. So the opposite of b would be 4. Okay, 2 times 2 is also 4. So when you divide, you get 1. The reason why we start there is that's where the middle of our table is going to go. I usually box that in because I know that's going to be your vertex. You don't have to label that as your vertex, but you can. Okay, and then because this is one that you can do with your graphing calculator, it is fine if you use your table on your graphing calculator for this one. So let's just review how to put that in. So we're going to go to y equals, and when you're putting this in, you are finding your parabola. So it's 2x squared minus 4x minus 1. Okay, you can do this without a graphing calculator. All you have to do is plug 1 in for x, and you could find that. Obviously, using your table is going to be quicker. And we started at different values here. I like to start at 0. Sometimes we've changed the change in the table. So if you start at 0 and go to 1, that's going to be the simplest for you to navigate. Okay, so at 1, it says it's negative 3. Okay, at 2, it's at negative 1. At 3, it's at 5. And then at 4, it says 15, so that's off my chart, so I'm not going to write that down. Depending on what your chart is, you might have to go a little further so that you span the grid. Okay, and we'll talk about that more in the next one. So that's just something you want to be careful of because we don't want to graph anything that's not accurate. So at 1, I'm at 1, 2, negative 3. Okay, at 2, I'm at negative 1. At 0, I'm at negative 1. And Thanks. And at 3, I'm at 5. Okay, and that does span my grid, so yeah. Before you connect, ask yourself if it's dashed, okay, or if it's solid. So it is dashed when there's no equal to. This is the part that sometimes gets me because I'm so used to just graphing the solid line, right? So make sure you'll be doing that in pencil. So if you need to erase and make it dashed, you can do that. Okay, and then the test point, you can choose whatever you want. So I usually choose 0, 0. Okay, if that's like too close to the edge for you, you can choose any point you want. You just have to tell me what point you chose. So if you use 0, 0, you plug it in. We know that this is going to be 0 minus 0, negative 1. Okay, so all I need to see from you is that this is going to be false. 0 is not less than negative 1. Okay, you don't have to write this next part down. I'm writing it down so you understand this. If it is false, you're not going to shade the test point. So we're not going to shade 0, 0. For this case, 0, 0 is inside, so that means that we shade outside. Okay, but true or false does not necessarily mean inside or outside. It depends on where your parabola is located. Okay, and I usually just like to shade around the parabola first so I don't get too overzealous and shade inside. You do want to make sure that you span the grid for this so you don't accidentally shade above a part here that would not have the shade in it. Okay, so just double check yours. And then let's see how the last one. Any questions for me in part A before we move on? All right, then for part B, we're going to start the same way. So it's the opposite of B. So it's positive 6, okay, and then 2 times A. So 6 divided by negative 2 is going to be negative 3. If you make a mistake here, you should be able to catch it when you are graphing it because you can see what your vertex is, right? So if you do make a mistake, okay, it should show up when you check this in your graphing calculator. So I'm going to graph it, okay, and I can see my vertex here is at negative 3, okay, so I can see that it does line up. I can check my table. So if this is the vertex, 5 is going to be the highest point, and then the other points are going to be symmetric. So I have negative 3, negative 2 is 4, negative 1 is 1, and at the very least, you need to have these points, okay? And then if I go to 0, 0 is negative 4. That's going to be on there, so I should have that. 1 is negative 11, which is going to be just off my graph. Okay, so sometimes when people are graphing, if you don't span the grid, what can happen is you have some inaccurate points, okay, and we don't want you to have that on there, okay, we don't want you to lose points for that. So we're going to go to negative 3, positive 5, negative 2, positive 4, negative 4, positive 4, negative 5 is 1, and negative 1 is 1. So we don't just want to stop there because then all we'll have is like this little part, and sometimes people will shade underneath it. We need to span the whole grid here. So at 0, we have negative 4, which means symmetrically at negative 6, I'm also going to be at negative 4. Okay, and then at 1, I'm at negative 11. I'm just putting this here as a point that I can go to. So this is solid, and this would be here. So when I'm drawing this branch, it should cross the axis at -4. Okay, so double check yours. Did you do that or did you follow this all the way down? Because it is going to be curving out and we don't want that. We want it to be as accurate as possible. Okay, so go ahead and add that in if you need to. You're going to need this because based on your test point, you should be shading inside for this. So if 0 is less than or equal to -4, okay, that is false. So we do not shade 0, 0. And in this case, that would be inside. Okay, here 0, 0 was inside, here 0, 0 was outside. So now when it's false, we're going to shade the inside. So if I would have stopped at those 5 points, okay, I would just have this, and I would be missing all of these points. Okay, you need to have all the points that are on the grid. So we got to shade this in as well. Okay, those are your boundary lines, and so we want to have them on the grid. Okay, and of course, just like on your review, your quiz will have a grid for you, so you are going to have to use that.